Hey everyone, and welcome back. You've been following along with us as we've been exploring all this stuff about global politics and media, right? I mean, there's some seriously interesting stuff happening out there.
It really is a fascinating time to be following global affairs.
Absolutely. And today we're taking a deep dive into this article.
Oh yeah, this one, the impact of Trump's USAID shutdown on global politics.
Yeah, and it is, well, it's packed with some pretty wild revelations.
Definitely makes you think.
For sure. Like, did you ever stop and think about how much power one single U.S. agency can have all over the world?
Well, I mean, USAID, they've got their hands in a lot of different cookie jars, that's for sure.
Yeah, we're talking billions of dollars here, and maybe even some agendas that aren't exactly, out in the open.
Yeah, it's funny. Most people, they hear USAID and they just think, oh, it's just about helping people, right? Sending aid overseas, doing good deeds.
The classic charitable organization.
Exactly. But this article, it really digs into how it's way more than that. It's like USAID is a player on the world stage.
It's almost like they're shaping global politics, right? Not just like handing out aid.
Exactly. It's what they call soft power, right? Using aid and development programs to build relationships with other countries, to influence governments, to basically push a pro-U.S. agenda all over the world.
It's pretty wild. And get this, the article even says that USAID has been used to fund media outlets.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, to like push certain narratives.
I see.
And check this out. In 2025 alone, they spent $268 million, $268 million on independent media globally.
Globally, wow.
Makes you wonder how independent that media really is.
It really does, doesn't it? It kind of makes you think twice about the information we see and hear. Like who's behind it? What's the real story?
Right, exactly. And the article goes on to talk about how this whole situation, it's actually causing a huge shift in global power.
Oh, yeah, it's like a seismic shift, honestly.
Right? It's like the U.S., they kind of stepped back from global leadership, at least in some ways, and now other countries are moving in to fill that void.
And let's be real, the biggest player stepping in is China.
Yeah, without a doubt.
I mean, they are strategically, expanding their influence, especially in Africa and Latin America.
Yeah, it's fascinating, right, to watch how this is changing everything. I mean, global alliances, the whole world order, it's all in flux.
Absolutely. It's like watching this massive game of chess unfold on a global scale.
Right, and China's making some big, bold moves, and one of their biggest is this thing called the Belt and Road Initiative. Have you heard of this?
Oh, the Belt and Road. Yeah. I mean, who hasn't?
It's huge.
It's this gigantic infrastructure project, right? Connecting continents with roads, railways, ports, the whole nine yards. They've already poured like over $1 trillion into it.
It's wild. It's like they're connecting the whole world.
Well, yeah, and not just connecting, right? I mean, they're giving out loans, they're offering aid to countries along these routes, they're strengthening their ties economically and politically.
So they're basically making friends and influencing people with these massive projects.
Exactly.
And you know what? The article actually points out that they're spending way more than the U.S. in these key regions.
Really?
Yeah, like way more. China pledged $50 billion to Africa alone, while the U.S. only spent, get this, $32.5 billion globally in 2024.
Wow, that's quite a difference.
Right, it's a huge difference. It really shows you how serious they are about, like, taking on this role as a global superpower.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, like, what does this mean for global stability, right? I mean, how's this all going to play out?
Big questions. And then there's this whole thing about independent media being funded by USAID, like we were saying.
Right, right.
The article, it claims that a lot of outlets, especially in Ukraine, were basically like bankrolled by the US.
So, like, is it really independent if it's being funded by a government with, its own interests?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It makes you question, like, how objective can these sources really be? Are they really just presenting the facts, or are they pushing an agenda?
Yeah, it's like you can't just take everything at face value anymore, especially when it comes to global politics. You got to be like a detective. Yeah.
Yeah, always be skeptical.
Exactly.
And it gets even crazier. The article goes on to say that Europe is like starting to see the US as an unreliable ally.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and apparently European leaders are starting to rethink their partnerships.
I mean, it makes sense, right, with everything we've been talking about.
Totally. They're probably looking for like new alliances, new ways to protect their interests.
Yeah, I mean, for decades, the relationship between the U.S. and Europe, that was like the bedrock of Western security and diplomacy. But now, things are changing,
It's a whole new world.
right? European leaders are like putting their own interests first. They're looking at China, especially for trade and investment.
There's even this quote from a German trade leader in the article, and it's like really telling. It says, national interests over ideological alignment with the U.S.
Wow.
I know, right?
I mean, that pretty much sums it up, doesn't it? The old world order is crumbling and something new is taking its place.
It's a pivotal moment. And speaking of pivotal moments, the article then takes this like totally unexpected turn.
Oh, Where does it go now?
Nuclear energy.
Nuclear energy.
Yeah, it talks about Trump's big push for nuclear power as a way to deal with like a national energy emergency in the US.
Okay. Interesting.
But in the thing, it ties back to Canada, believe it or not.
Canada. Okay.
They've got these huge uranium reserves in a place called the Athabasca Basin.
Right, right. I've heard that.
And get this, their uranium production, it's expected to double by 2035.
Wow. Double.
Yeah, so the article suggesting that Canada is about to become like this major player in the whole global nuclear energy scene.
Makes sense, especially with the U.S. and other countries pushing for nuclear power.
Right, it's like Trump energy policies ended up creating all these opportunities for other countries.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating to see how all these seemingly random events, they're actually connected on a global scale.
It's crazy, right? But it also makes you wonder, like, what does this mean for climate change? What about the risks of nuclear weapons? It's like a mixed bag.
Definitely. Nuclear energy, it's a potential solution to, our dependence on fossil fuels, but it also comes with its own set of risks and challenges.
It's a double-edged sword, for sure.
Yeah. And as we move towards this new energy landscape, we got to be really careful.
We
Yeah.
got to weigh the pros and cons very carefully.
Absolutely. One thing that really struck me about this article is how it kind of challenges the way we usually see China, in Western media. It's like, are we getting the whole picture?
Yeah, it really makes you think twice about those narratives we're so used to hearing, right? Like, is it all just, propaganda?
Exactly. And the article even suggests that some of the negative stuff we hear about China, it might be tied to, like, U.S. political agendas and funding.
It's almost like they're saying, don't believe everything you read.
Right. We need to be more critical. Like, who are the sources? What are their motives? What's the other side of the story? It even suggests, get this, visiting China ourselves to see firsthand.
Wow, that's pretty bold, right? Go see for yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Because, like, there's no substitute for actually experiencing a culture, talking to people, forming your own opinion.
It's like reading about a place in a book is one thing, but actually going there is a whole different story.
Exactly. And it's so important, especially because of these complex, geopolitical issues.
Okay, but let's be real. This article paints a pretty intense picture, right? Like, U.S. influence is fading, China's on the rise, Europe's doing its own thing, and the truth is getting lost somewhere in all the noise. It's kind of a lot to process.
I hear you. It can feel overwhelming, but, change can be scary, but it can also bring new opportunities.
So it's not all doom and gloom.
Not necessarily. Like, think about it. This shift in power, it could lead to a world where there isn't just one superpower calling all the shots. A more multipolar world.
So instead of one big boss, we might have like a more balanced system.
Exactly. Imagine decisions being made through collaboration, different perspectives being valued, a more level playing field. But it would require, a real shift in mindset.
From competition to cooperation, that's a big ask. But what about conflict? Like, as all this is happening, won't that just lead to more clashes and disagreements?
Well, conflict is always a possibility, of course. But it's not inevitable, History shows us that these big power transitions, they can happen peacefully if countries are willing to talk, to find common ground, to use diplomacy.
It's not like a guaranteed path to war.
Not at all. We have choices, we have agency, and that's kind of empowering, right? We can shape the future.
Yeah, that is empowering. Okay, before we move on, there's something that kind of jumped out at me at the end of the article. There's this sponsored segment about nuclear energy and this company called Mustang Energy that's investing in like Canada's uranium market. Seemed a little random.
Ah, yeah. It's not random at all, actually. Remember how the article talked about Trump's push for nuclear energy?
Right, right.
Well, Canada, they're going to benefit big time from that because of all their uranium. And Mustang Energy, they're basically getting ready to, cash in on the nuclear boom.
So they're like riding the wave.
Exactly. The article's kind of subtly pointing out how these global power dynamics, they create opportunities for certain players, It's all connected.
It's like we've been like unraveling this giant tapestry, right? And every thread leads to something new and more complex.
It's a fascinating journey.
It really is. Okay, well, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive. My brain is like officially overloaded.
I hear you.
But the conversation doesn't have to end here, right?
Absolutely not. We want you to keep thinking about these ideas, do your own research, form your own opinions.
The world is changing fast, and there's always more to learn.
Always.
Okay, so let's take a quick break to let all this sink in, and then we'll be back with part 3, where we'll dive even deeper into what these global shifts mean for the future. Okay, so we're back. We've been like really deep in the weeds with this whole USAID thing, all these power shifts, the media stuff, nuclear energy, it's a lot. But you know what I keep coming back to?
What's that?
How does any of this actually affect people? Like you and me, everyday people. What's the takeaway here?
That's a great question. And honestly, that's what it all boils down to, right? It might seem like this, like, big global game of risk or something, but it really does affect all of us. Like, the information we see, the choices we have, even how we see the world, it's all tied to this stuff.
Yeah, earlier we were talking about how it's hard to tell what's real news and what's, biased or even straight up propaganda. It feels like everyone's got an agenda these days.
It's true. And this article, it really highlights that. If even sources that say they're independent might be getting money or pressure from, governments or whoever, then you got to be super careful about what we believe.
It's almost like we have to be like media detectives or something, constantly checking facts and figuring out who to trust.
Yeah, those critical thinking skills are more important now than ever. You got to question everything, look for different perspectives, think about why someone might be telling you something.
So we can't just sit back and passively like absorb whatever we see, right? We got to be active, thinking ourselves.
Exactly. You're not just a consumer of information, you're a participant. And that goes for all this global stuff, too. It's about understanding how it affects you, your community, your future.
Okay, so how do we do that? It all seems so big and overwhelming. Like, where do we even start?
Well, just being aware of it all is a big first step,
Yeah.
like we're doing now. You're already ahead of the game because you're seeing the connections.
Right, knowledge is power, but what about actually doing something? Can we actually make a difference with all these like global forces at play?
Of course, there are tons of things you can do. You can support groups that are fighting for honest journalism, or that teach people how to be media savvy. You can get involved in things that are pushing for transparency from governments and big companies.
So basically, be a good citizen, be informed, be engaged.
Yeah, exactly. And think about your own choices. Like what businesses you support, what you share online, who you talk to, even if they have different opinions than you. All those little things can add up.
It's like that butterfly effect thing, right? Small actions can lead to big changes.
Exactly. You might feel like a tiny piece of a giant puzzle, but every piece matters. And when we all choose to be informed, engaged, proactive, that's how we make a better future.
I like that. It's not about feeling helpless. It's about feeling empowered to actually do something.
Exactly. That's the biggest thing I hope people take away from this deep dive. The world's complicated, yeah, but you're not powerless. You can learn, you can think critically, you can make good choices, and you can be a part of positive change.
Well said. So as we ramp up this deep dive, our challenge to you is this. Don't just sit back and watch the world change. Go out there and be a part of making the future you want to see. Stay curious, stay engaged, and keep diving deep. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.